get started here. Well, no, before we get started, we're going to have our election. So, should I put this on? Okay, we got people on Zoom tonight, so we're just waiting. You ready? Okay. Again, greetings. Thanks for coming out. Thanks to all those watching on Zoom. Tonight, a special night, besides having our speakers and the party, we didn't have elections in November like we should have, so we're having them tonight. We'll make it quick. The board now, the PAHS board now as it sits is myself, president, Thomas Elliott back there, vice president, secretary Wendy Schifferl, and treasurer Carla. And Carla will be stepping down. We have 3 board directors. We have Brad Patterson, who's not here tonight, Peggy Colgate, who's also not here, and Art Shin, and he's also not here tonight, and he's going to be stepping down. But we do have 2 volunteers, Jeanette Aldis, who will be stepping in if you guys vote her in into the oh, Jeanette, stand up. There she is right there. Into the treasurer's position, and Brad Bowers right here into the director's position. But before we vote, I'd like, we need to take nominations from the floor. So I know there's somebody out there who wants to be president of PAHS. So stand up and make it known, or if you want to nominate somebody for one of the board positions, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, the director's positions are set. What? Yeah, no guarantees. Anyway, is there any nominations from the floor? Going once, twice, 3 times, no nominations from the floor. Okay, I'd like to vote on the, okay. So the slate will be myself, president, Thomas, vice president, Wendy, secretary, Jeanette, treasurer, and of course our 2 board members who are all set, and then Brad Bowers for the empty director's position. All those all those in favor as the board as it sits? Aye. Okay, that one doesn't count. Okay, those on Zoom, you can put your vote in the chat box. Okay. Anyway, okay, so the board is elected for 2024. Yay. Okay. Just a couple of things and then we'll get started. Who's first, John, on the speakers? You're second. Okay. Where is Jan? Anyway, we'll deal with that. We're not going to clean up tonight. We'll clean up tomorrow morning. So after our speakers, we can visit and eat more dessert and eat more food. Yeah. But we will clean up tomorrow. So let's not worry about it tonight. Also too, Jeanette and Carla, if you haven't renewed your membership, we'll be taking memberships tonight. I did. Yes, ma'am. Yes, yes. Okay, the question, I think everybody heard. If you enroll online for PAHS, or even if you enroll with the paper enrollment, you're automatically enrolled in the Colorado Archaeological Society, the state chapter. Okay, so members, that's about it. We'll get started with our first speaker, Wendy. That'll be Wendy Schifrel.
One's yours.
There's all kinds of stuff on here. I should say here at the PAHS January presentation 2020. And then I just left and right arrows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or you can scroll out. Yeah. It's working.
Okay. Okay. Now, I'm not sure, are there speaker, can you hear me out there? Okay. So I'm Wendy Schifrel, and this past summer, my husband Dennis and I got to go on a trip to Ireland the last 2 weeks of June. And we did a small group tour that essentially is a 10-day tour that went around basically the circumference of the island. And so I'm going to just show some kind of general pictures of some of the places we saw, but I'm going to focus a bit more on some of the older archaeological places that we saw on our trip. So, so we started out in Dublin, and Dublin, of course, has lots of old buildings. Hundreds of years old to more recent. Christchurch being one of the more famous cathedrals, and then the Long Room, which is one of the oldest, largest libraries in Ireland. And then we traveled to very small towns like Kinsale, some of the original architecture, and then they also would do things to tidy. They called them the tidiest towns. There's little competitions throughout the country amongst towns to be the tidiest, and they would win every year. They choose who would win every year. And then we would travel to places where we were starting to see older archaeology. Dingle is a beautiful bay. Got to go kayaking, but this little building here on the bottom is called a folly, which were built just essentially for entertainment purposes, and just tiny little places that had like 1 or 2 stories, just to hang out and have fun. More recent castles we got to see, like Cowmore was an amazing place. And then older places as well. And we did also go up into North Ireland, into Derry, and saw the big walls that still surround the original town of Derry, Blarney Castle. That would be our one thing is don't bother kissing the Blarney Stone. There's that much neater things to look at. Another very old castles. And we also went on to Inishmore Island, which is part of the Aran Islands. And I'll show some other things from it later on. Then, of course, we did see some just natural wonders of Ireland. The Cliffs of Moher are amazing, so is the Giant's Causeway, which is a volcanic. And of course, sheep, lots of sheep. And they have the peat bogs. And in a few places, they still will harvest the peat into logs that they dry and then use for burning for heat. But they don't do that so much anymore because they've realized now that, well, once you take the peat away and the bogs away, they aren't going to be coming back because I think they grow like a new layer once a year is less than a centimeter. So these are thousands of years old to get that height. And then we started seeing some of the older archaeology. This is a stone circle in Kinmare, which I think they believe was probably like 3,000 years old. And most likely in that center rock there is a burial. And then we got to go out to this place. This is I'm not going to attempt to say all the names, but it's a portal tomb, and great. Polnabron, and this is one of the older archaeology that it was probably built over 4,000 years ago. But then about 3,000 years ago, they did put some human remains in the portal, in the tomb. And it was excavated, I think, back in the 1980s, and they found at least 33 human remains, ranging from babies to adults in their 40s. And 40 was considered old. Most people only lived into their 30s. And these stones are a limestone, and I believe the top stone, the capstone there, that's 1.5 tons. So the fact that they got that upright, balanced on there. There's some speculation that when this was originally built and made, this was covered in earth. So they had the stones as kind of the skeleton, and then it was covered in earth. And that's just another picture of it. Then this is another place we went to. These are not my pictures, but it's such a large fort that I just got some pictures off the internet to get a better, so you can get a better feel about the size of this. This was on the Inishmore Island, which is part of the Aran Islands. And this island is basically a big slab of rock. And over the thousands of years that people lived there, they would bring in sand and seaweed and dirt and layer it onto rock in alternating layers in order to create soil so that they could start growing things. But otherwise, it was just rock. But this fort was built, as you can see up there, around 1100 BC. And the original walls were 1100 BC, and then they did the outer walls about 500 BC. And these are all dry stone masonry, so no mortar was used. And it goes right up to the edge of the cliff there. They actually aren't sure why it was built. They don't see any evidence necessarily like, were there any battles fought there? They know that there is a lot of metallurgy done there, and there's a few burials, and around the outsides of the walls, there are a few huts, like little homes. Then the last place that we went to was Naut. And this was, for me, one of the most amazing places. These are just drawings. The one on the left is an artist's rendition of what they think it looked like at the height of when it was in use. And then on the right there is one of the more, I forget when it was taken, probably in the 70s, what it kind of looked like. And then they did extensive excavations on it for over 40 years. They did some excavations in 1941, but then in 1962 is when they started major excavations that they continued for 40 years. And so you can kind of see how extensive they did. And that's what it looks like today. And what it is, it's a passage tomb. So inside this, it's, well, the main mound, the main tomb is 90 meters wide, 11 meters high, and it has 2 long passages inside. And then there's 17 smaller tombs on the outside. And they also did find, believe, almost 200 remains, either cremated or skeletal, within the main tomb. And that's in there. And then I have some pictures. What's also amazing about this site are these stones that you see around the outside of the biggest mound. The majority of them have rock art on them, or have carvings in them. And so the original structure was built and at 3200 BC, and was probably used for 1,000 years or so, and then it was essentially abandoned. But the site itself around it was used nonstop. So that's where you see this little stone rectangular, that's just a house someone built at one point along the way. But this is the entrance into the main mound. We couldn't go in. But there's all this quartz rock at the entrances. And there's a debate. The archaeologists who worked on this one felt that these quartz rock were brought in and left at the entrances. But there's another mound called New Grange, and they felt that the quartz rock was actually a facade around the entrances to the mound. So they put the rock back up on there. So it's one of those things, archaeology, so we have different opinions about things. So he decided that the stone should stay on the ground. And then there was also a wooden structure of poles. And so first, it's like, oh, it looks like a wood henge or a stone henge. But there's been extensive research done on this, where there's like 7 volumes of books that are probably 2 to 3 inches thick. And so after all their studies, they came to the conclusion that it was probably a structure, like down there in the bottom corner is their hypothesis, but it is just a hypothesis. So again, these large stones, which were probably 4.5 feet high to a little over 6 feet wide, most of them had these amazing carvings on them. And this area, Naut is the name of this structure, has 1/3 of the megalithic rock art in Ireland. And this is one of the really amazing ones. So the top picture, the left top, is my picture. And then I used the D-stretch on the right just to try and see a little more detail. And then the bottom there is the drawing from the journals or the books that they did research on. And it's again supposition that maybe it was a sundial. And the hole in the center there was where you could put a stick. And so maybe a sundial, maybe a way of looking at moon phases. And then this is another one where they feel it is showing the cycles of the moon and the moon phases. And then inside the tomb, when they did the excavations, and it took, I think it was over 10 years before they finally discovered the entrances to the tomb. And they found these big stone bowls that were used that had cremations in them. And then on the right there, they found this stone mace head made out of flint. And inside, they have lots of carvings as well. And so you can see on the right there is one of those bowls that had human or cremation in it, was part of their ceremonial. And then on the left here, this is a stone where it was reused, it was repurposed. So you think about that, this was built over 3000 BC, and they were using stone that already had rock art on it, and they picked away to kind of clear the slate and put new rock art on it. So it was rather amazing that, okay, so here they have these enormous stones and they're reusing them. And that is the inside, one of the inside passages. And I believe some of those goes up like 6 meters. So it's just amazing architecture inside. And then again, quite a bit of rock art. And that's one of the main passageways. And then I just put in that, that's one of the groups of archaeologists that did the excavations. And the fellow second from the left, that's George Egan. He was the head archaeologist who was involved the whole 40 years of the excavation, and was involved in helping to write the 7 volumes of books. But yeah, that's how they dressed. And they would they stayed in a mansion, and then they'd ride their bicycles to the site every day to do their excavations. And then you can walk up to the top of the mound and look across and then see the other main mound, which is called Newgrange, which is a little bit older than Nout. And it is also we didn't get to see that, but it was a very grand place to see as well. It only has one passage into it. And that was it. You have any questions? Yeah. So Nout here, that's it's on the east side, and it's kind of midway between Dublin and the border with North Ireland, but it is in Ireland. So it's relatively close to Dublin. It's an UNESCO site. Yeah, and to see it, you go to a visitor center, and then they drive you in a little bus to the site. And then it's a very structured tour, and you're just like, okay, you're in, and then it's like, all right, gotta go. So it's one of those places it'd be neat to go again, and take the tour again, but yeah. Yeah. Oh, have no idea. Don't know what the workforce was, but well, no, actually the pyramids, they were paid laborers that were they weren't slaves. They were actually had their own little town and all that. But yeah, there's no indication as to who all were the group. But I mean, the fact that they were moving these massive rocks and then you had the artist decorating them basically, or whatever those symbols meant to them. You know, these were talented, knowledgeable people. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I think I I don't remember. I think no, it did not have, or they cleared the trees away. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Well, over the years, over the thousands of years, it was used for grazing and farming. I mean, that's what some of these mounds you could barely even see were in existence until they started doing the excavations. So, and you know, and some of them were kind of plowed over because, well, they needed the land for pasture or growing, what, you know. Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's in Ireland throughout. Yeah. And depending upon where you were in Ireland, it was different kind of rock. So then the fences look different. The rock walls look different because of the type of rock. Mm-hmm. But like with Nout, they said that they found that some of that rock was brought in from over 100 miles away. So they, you know, to get the right rock that they wanted for, you know, so it was a lot of work, and it's just amazing to me how, you know, that long ago they were doing all this, and then the artwork, and then again the architecture, that it held up for all these years. So yeah, questions. We were there for 10 days. Well, the tour was 10 days. We were in Dublin for 2 days. So essentially 2 weeks. All right. Can you
This, right? Like that. Okay. Okay. 98360. It's the membrane pottery. 9836680. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay, but I need some light because I got a bunch of notes to read. Okay.
These like,
Yeah, just that these front lights are good.
Carla, turn off this main bank of lights. Let's see if you got. Turn that one off.
Yeah, that's
Turn the
good.
other switch on. Have you got enough?
Yeah, that's plenty for me. So, okay. Hmm. Okay, this is not about a trip that I took except to the pottery studio and the library. So this is going to be a lot different than Wendy's. It's very densely research oriented. So anyway, I'm a potter myself, and so I wanted to. This is called Down the Rabbit Hole, and I wanted to find out as much as I could about this amazing Mimbres pottery, which is down in southwestern New Mexico, in Deming and Silver City in the museums. And so some of my attempts at replicating the pots are over there on the table. And there's also some actual authentic pots from Casas Grandes, old and new, and from Zuni and Acoma, which when you'll find out later that they think they might. There is no microphone. Oh, okay. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so this pottery is so amazing, and I'm sure everybody's heard about it, right? Mimbres, yeah. So I decided that instead of talking about that again, I was going to find out all the new research, the recent research about this culture. Okay. Nope. Can you show me how to advance it again? Nope. Oh, the down arrow, there we go. Okay, so this kind of activity by potters is not unusual to try to replicate ancient pottery. For example, Andy Ward, he's well known on the internet. He's in Arizona, and he gives classes and lectures on prehistoric pottery replication, which is kind of interesting in light of the repatriation by a lot of museums of the original pottery. He replicates a lot of different styles. He replicates Hohokam, Tonto, Gila, Salado, and some Mimbres. A good place to start if you're wanting to learn about this is the book called Painted by a Distant Hand by Stephen LeBlanc, published in 2004. And in his introduction, he says, and I quote, "Whimsical, enduring, unexpected, sophisticated, no other pottery tradition in the Americas seemed to have captured the fancy of so many different people as the Mimbres painted bowls." His map shows where it is there in the southwest part of New Mexico. And that's an aerial photograph of the river that he took. Mimbres actually means willows in Spanish. So there were at one time willows there. Around 50 people established villages along the Mimbres River. And this is a Swartz ruin that was excavated in 1932 by the Cosgroves. And by 1100, there were many villages. The two excavated rooms at the Swartz ruin had 120 rooms. So it was a pretty big settlement. The years between AD 1000 and 1150 was the classic Mimbres period and the fluorescence of the pottery. After 1100, there was a substantial decline in numbers. So people always wonder what happened to them, like they wonder what happened to all these cultures. And LeBlanc said, this question remains unanswered. The most obvious candidates are the Zuni, however, require much more research to answer this question. So now for some of the new research, which is pretty diverse. Newly published research from 2021 examines Mimbres immigration. Seltzer Rogers, a PhD PhD student at the University of New Mexico, recently published his research on the dynamics between the Membres and the Casas Grandes cultures. Previously, archaeologists thought that the Membres people mostly went southward into Chihuahua, or that they simply died off, because the same type of pottery has not appeared elsewhere. However, he argues that they only went to Casas Grandes. And this is an example of modern Casas Grandes Pacame pottery that's just in Chihuahua area. He says that rather they also went to the pueblos of Zuni, Acoma, and Hopi. We now know that Membres are the ancestors for several groups based on DNA, pottery styles, and oral histories. This fits into the larger trend in Southwestern archaeology of viewing migration as a process over time that occurred on many scales. So the book on the left, Membres Mythology, Tales from the Painted Clay, was by Kunkel, and it was written in 2013. The book on the right, New Perspectives on Membres Pottery Designs in Their Social Context, was written by Roth Gilman, who was here in Colorado, and Anyon. Pottery always seems to draw the most attention about this culture because it's so beautiful, especially the designs that depict animals and humans that make the region famous. And they say some are realistic, sometimes impossible, some are horrific, and others are humorous, and some are so risque that Hattie Cosgrove censored parts of them in her reproductions in 1932. I didn't show you any of those, but you're welcome to look in the book. So the New Perspectives book, they conducted extremely, extensive statistical analysis to see if they could see patterning by the kind of animal, or by symbolic association, or by the animal's habitat. But after all that work, they found no patterning. And so they concluded that there was a process for the exchange of the decorated pottery between each community, because each community had some of each design. So she said that it created strong bonds among the communities and was a sign of belonging to the Membres society. So in contrast, Kunkel, he didn't do any kind of, deep statistical analysis, but he just assigned mythological meaning to the designs, whether humans or animals or combinations of animals and humans. But he couldn't tell really whether these were deities, whether they were humans dressed up in costumes, or whether they were just humans that were trying to assume the powers of the animal, because they held animals in such high esteem that they thought associating yourself with an animal would give you the power of the animal. And interestingly, many of these pottery images were also found in petroglyphs in the area. And there's an amazing database. In fact, you can see so many of these images online. But this database was started by LeBlanc because he went around the whole country to every museum that had a collection of this pottery and took photographs and put it in the database. So they're pretty easy to see online, but I'd like to see them in the museum. The combinations are only a small part of his book. He also assigns mythological meaning to almost every type of animal image. For example, quail on the left are present in Tiwa and Zuni mythology and are associated with agricultural cycles and the underworld. He explains each image in great detail. The image on the right is a well-known prayer stance with both arms raised and is often also seen in petroglyphs. This is an image, blanket imagery. Blankets are often seen to hide clandestine sexual activity. And you can see that the girl there, has a Hopi hairstyle. So it means she was unmarried. And the big fly, he's a mythic spirit. So when you're hiking in the Southwest, lots of times there's this one fly that follows along with you. And the Pueblo people believe that this buzzing companion will whisper inspiration and insight if he sits on your shoulder. In the Pueblo creation myth, Big Fly gives the warrior twins the correct answers to the questions asked by their father, the sun. Kunkel's book is very interesting and includes over 300 illustrations and interpretations. This is a picture from LeBlanc's book again. And so this is another theory about what this pottery means, because this is a story bowl. You can see the young warrior there returning from a successful hunting trip with his bow and arrow and his faithful assistants, the dogs, and his wife is there to welcome him and take the deer, and his mother is not so shy. That's what this Hopi Indian said. And she was, really, really happy that he had a successful hunting trip. Fred Capote, a Hopi interpretation. And this other bowl is, everyone asks what it is because it seems like some of them have webbed feet, and it's associated with wavy lines that represent water. So it might be a tadpole or a frog. It is always depicted in the negative and fills the space, which is pretty common in Members pottery, and a kind of like a modern artistic form, and it suggests that it was the creation of a single artist. So now, to go further down the rabbit hole of research, this one is this researcher Thomas Wynn. He was at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs until he retired recently. He let's see. Most people have interpreted this art as mythical, or socially, or as a story, or geometric. But Thomas Wynn and others in his article entitled "Decoding Members Painting: Cognitive Archaeology" states that their extensive research has allowed them to recognize that almost all motifs found on Members bowls can be read as abstract references to trance state visual experiences, some with direct reference to the natural world and others generated by the brain or entoptic. And as he says, as we will demonstrate, Members artists painted in abstracted form various aspects of datura, or what we call jimson weed, and from its seed pods and first blossoming to the final withering of the flower. They also painted the principal pollinators of datura, hawk moths, and the visions associated with ingesting datura. So figure 12 on the far right bottom demonstrates how the abstraction of the datura blossom is often used as a format. So you can see the shape of the datura blossom, and then over that he's painted 2 deer. He says, we specifically argue that the association between hawk-moth and datura would have been reinforced by the fact that zigzag lines are themselves entoptic shapes commonly seen while in a datura-induced trance. In all native cultures of Americas, art is rarely for art's sake, so each motif and painted element has meaning. So he's saying that these are all the so-called geometric designs even were non-objective inventions, but rather abstracted depictions of flowers, most commonly datura, and the brain-generated entopic forms associated with its ingestion. So this last slide shows a man trapping or snaring birds. And so this researcher, Michelle Hegman, she believes that this shows the social significance again, and shows that I belong here and I am part of the Members society. And she also thinks that the individual styles and just creativity and fun, is given too little credit. Archaeologists, in fact, think that there was a rabbit master artist. Perhaps all of these researchers are partially correct. So there are two reasons I called this down the rabbit hole, because the holes in the pots are always in the pots when they're in burials, to let the spirit of the pot escape, and also to let the spirit of the deceased escape into the upper world. In English language idiom, it means getting deep into something, or an ending up somewhere strange, or a person who gets lost in research or loses track of time, like Alice and like myself. And so here's White Rabbit on the right. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and you can see the pottery back there on the table. Any questions? Questions, or you got, yeah. Landing, Utah? Yeah, I have, yeah. Uh-huh.
That's state park. They have a repository.
Oh, do they? Okay, well, that's
I
another.
mean, it's numbers 4,000 to 5,000.
Oh, wow.
I think it was 15 years ago,
Mhm.
but it's behind glass. But it's an amazing collection of the original pottery of
Mhm.
the Four Corners area.
Okay, another place I have to go.
And it's a huge collection.
Okay.
It's behind glass. Who's next? For those of you at home, they're doing a George item drawing.
Nine eight 3648. Six 4 8.
You ready for this?
Okay.
Let's put it on. Anything you say will be heard by at least a dozen people.
Does this go in my ear?
Nope.
No.
Nope, nope. All right. This presentation is yours.
Okay, how do I advance? Here. Let's see.
Language.
Yes.
Okay.
A page up or down. Okay, I can do that. Maybe.
Say it's a hot mic. Your voice is thing here. That just goes to people.
Okay, okay. See how I do.
You the lights down?
I'm okay this way, I think. My short presentation is about language diversity, and I titled it Living Languages based on the name of an exhibit in a museum that I saw. This was, I guess, in 2014 when I was traveling. And the question is, where would we find a linguistic hotspot in the world? Identified as one of the most linguistically diverse regions of the world by UNESCO. And this was in about 2014, 2015. And there's 7 distinct unrelated language families, 34 different First Nation languages. And within these language families, there's at least 93 different dialects. And if you really think about it, it's in a, well, I'll tell you, it's in a fairly small area. Anybody have any thoughts about where we might be talking about? No? Okay. All right. No, Vancouver Island. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, if you look at the island and you see this map is a little hard to read or see, but the green line on the sort of the north side of the island is the main thoroughfare of the highway that goes up through the island. And if you see how many connections there are to the coastal area, to the Pacific, there's like only three roads. And once they get to the Pacific, they don't even branch out. Part of that contributed to the diversity in language and cultures in that area, and the indigenous peoples. Challenges in trying to survive. You know, if you were living on the coast and you were fishing and you were able to build shelter and everything, did you have any incentive to go anywhere else and mingle with any of the other people in the surrounding areas? Or were you able to? And one of the next things that I'd point out is that British Columbia, Vancouver is very geographically isolated from the rest of Canada. If you go to the east, you have the Rocky Mountains, which were definitely a barrier to migration. You go to the west, you've got the Pacific Ocean, you've got these very rugged coastlines and really dense forests, old growth forests, a lot of rivers, waterways. And so people didn't necessarily share their cultures. And as a result, you ended up with all these different dialects that evolved over the years. I've got several pictures just giving you an idea. This is a picture of the west coast of Vancouver Island. Then if you go to the next picture, this is an example of how dense the forests are. And when the indigenous people were living in these areas, the Forest Service hadn't shown up to build pathways. So if you can imagine trying to, survive in a very hospitable climate. It's generally very mild, for the most part because of the ocean currents. But you didn't have to go outside of your area to provide for the needs of life. And so people just remained, in their little pockets of civilization, little villages or whatever. Then the next picture I got is just another example of the ruggedness of the coastal area. And this is on the west coast of Vancouver Island. One of the things that, if you look at the island, it's not a very big island. It's 63 miles wide and it's about 213 miles long. It's about the size, an eighth of the size of Colorado. And then you consider how many people, different cultures, they had, their art was different, their totem poles, their customs, their languages. And one of the efforts in the recent times has been to locate language speakers in the different communities and document the languages because they're being lost. And they had a very similar education system where they took the indigenous children away from their parents. And that was roughly from 1880 to the last residential school was closed in 1996. So you're talking about 120 years of people losing their culture and being discouraged from speaking their languages. And so many people, even if they knew the language, they wouldn't speak it because there were punishments. There's an exhibit at the Royal BC Museum in Victoria, Vancouver, of the First Nations communities, and it features 37 of the indigenous communities, their languages, and they have some native speakers, that they have like videos of them and they have examples of their art and everything. And there is a government effort to try to find people and document and encourage people to share their cultures and their languages. In 2000, let's see. The University of Victoria in British Columbia, with cooperation efforts by the government, has developed programs, and they will actually send instructors out to the different villages if there's people that will sign up, if they have enough people to sign up for these classes. And part of it is some of the people that sign up were, well, for the most part, most of them, I suppose, were in the residential schools where they were encouraged to speak English. They were discouraged or punished if they spoke their native languages, if they practice any of their family customs. And they are trying to help these people sort of bring these things back, these parts of their culture back. And part of it is the people have been so suppressed for so long that a lot of these people just there's psychological ways that they're working with the people so that they can document their history, document their languages and their arts. There was an contest, worldwide contest for judging exhibits of this sort around the world. And this exhibit in the Royal BC Museum was one of 4 exhibits worldwide that was chosen and awarded this recognition that it was very unique, well done, and obviously worthwhile. I think it's been about 15 years that the first People's Cultural Council of Canada started working with the Indigenous communities and reclaiming these languages. In many cases, the languages, we don't even have those sounds in our language. You know, it's hard to even write these down because the sounds are much different. So it's a work in progress, but they have developed several programs and even a 4-year Bachelor of Education where they can, you know, educate teachers to further this effort and, you know, maybe retrain people to recognize what their cultures were. I think that's it. But yeah.
The suppression of indigenous.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they started it a little bit after we started it here. Here it started around the 1860s. Up there it started about the 1880s. So I don't know if it was patterned after what was happening here. But they had a program that when a native indigenous woman would become pregnant, she would be registered. And then when the baby was born, in many cases, they took the baby at birth or they took the baby, you know, before it was very old and placed it in orphanages. And in some cases, they even adopted these children out to families and the children never got back to their own homes. And of course, there were a lot, I think just recently, there have been burial grounds that they're finding, you know, where a lot of these children were abused or neglected and died, were buried and were never identified as such. Families never, their records were sealed. Yeah, it was pretty brutal. And that program to identify pregnant women was just, I guess you'd say, outlawed or done away with in 2019. Yeah, so it's reaching pretty close to now. So, yeah. Well, the government was trying to anglicize everyone. You know, everybody had to, yeah, everybody had to speak English. Everybody had to follow European customs or, you know, whatever the powers that be said, you know, how they should dress, how their hair should be cut. The children were punished if they spoke any of their own languages, if they tried to practice any of their customs, rituals. So, but in the island of Vancouver, because there's so many different communities and so many different isolated cultures, you have different artwork, like they still do the totem pole carving, and they're distinctly, different from region to region. There's a town north of Victoria, it's Duncan, and they have a display throughout the town of totem poles that have been created by different communities. And it's interesting seeing the interpretations of, why this one has an eagle and why this one has an owl on the top, or, the documentation is really very interesting. It's an area I really like traveling in that area. People are nice. I understand English. But I was fascinated with the exhibit at the museum. I was up there for about a week in 2015, and I went to it twice. And it's just very interesting, when you start to realize the length of time in history that these people were subjected to control. They were really robbed of any rights. And how many different cultures there were just in that small area. If you take 1/8 of the size of Colorado and you put in, maybe 100 different dialects, how do you communicate with each other? Even if they had traveled, or, even if they had commingled, I suppose there would have been some, I'm sure they would have been able to communicate, but it's interesting that they had all the different distinct languages and arts and customs, and so yeah.
Does anybody determine how long these people actually inhabited this region?
Before the white men came, well, they have Asian influence. They probably have people coming from Alaska. There's a lot of different cultures that came into that area. But it's far back. I didn't get into that. But I just think it's appalling when I think about the length of time that these people were controlled and how much of their culture they lost and how much there is to recover. And I think it's admirable of the government. Well, I'm sure it's, there's a variety of people pushing for this, but I think it's good that there is a formal program where they're trying to assist the people in reclaiming their cultures and in documenting their languages and their customs, and because there are so many different unique communities up there. But that island, they have old growth forests. They've got sort of about in the middle of the island, they have I think they're fir trees that they say, there's one that I think they say is 800 years old. I mean, it's huge. It's like being out on the Olympic Peninsula, if you've been out there and see the rainforests. It's interesting territory. Anyway. Okay, thank you.
Before we get to our last speaker,
Got it.
For those of you at home, they're doing another George drawing. We'll be with you in a minute. But it's a hot week. Did you say? But nobody here is this. Okay. That's the game.
I'm ready. Last fall, Doug and I were yakking about something at one of these meetings or something at the museum. And for whatever reason, I mentioned my affinity for a rum from Barbados called Mount Gay and the fact that I had done a project there once. And when he put out a call for people to do talks, it was still fresh in my mind. So I thought it might be a good one to do. I'm always ready to reminisce about in Barbados. Back in 1987, I was for about 5 years at that point, I've been working, or 4 years, been working for an outfit in Western Illinois that's kind of like Crow Canyon. We did education and contract work. And I was contacted by a professor from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, where I had been a visiting lecturer earlier in the 80s, asking if I'd be interested in becoming the field director for a project in Barbados that he was doing. His name was Jerry Handler, and he was a cultural anthropologist, still is, I guess. And in the 70s, he had worked with a guy, a historic archaeologist named Fred Lang. And whatever they were, I'm not sure what the original project was, but they happened to luck into accidentally find a cemetery of enslaved people on one of the plantations they were working on called the Newton Slave Burial Ground. And they did a fair amount of excavation on it. Not much was left except teeth because the bone preservation was so poor, but they did get artifacts and information about burial practices. And it was quite a well-known thing in Barbados at the time. People were interested in most of the descendants. The people that live there today are descendants of people that were kidnapped in Africa and taken to Barbados. Nearly 500,000 people over a couple of centuries. Many of them went to other colonies because Barbados was the stopping off point of the ships coming from Africa. And large workforces on sugarcane plantations starting in the late 1600s. So Jerry wanted to do another project to go back and try to find another cemetery because that was still the only one known was Newton. And it was obviously enticing because it was an interesting thing to do. I was young and fairly fancy free at the time and could afford to do it because it would mean a 10-week unpaid leave of absence from my job because the grant he had from National Geographic was only for expenses, so no salaries. The other qualm I had was Jerry Handler, who, to give you an idea of what he was like to work with, he left the department a few years later after he punched out the department chairman in the hallway one day. So, but he was only going to be there for the first 5 weeks and wouldn't be in the field because he didn't know how to do field work. So I figured it was worth the risk to go do it. Let's see, where are we? So our 87 project was try to find some other cemeteries. Why weren't any others known when there were so many enslaved people on the island over the centuries? And we were going to do survey and test excavations and hopefully find another cemetery that we would do some more intensive excavations on. If we failed to find one, we were planning to go to Newton for a couple of weeks to do some more work there. Unfortunately, Jerry pissed off somebody in Barbados and we couldn't get permission to do that part of it. So we ended up 10 weeks just doing other stuff and without, as you'll see, finding any more cemeteries. But it was still a good experience. No project can happen without a good crew. And I had, fortunately, some good people. Guy, Beth, and Keith were graduate students at SIU Carbondale. Simon and Andy were local undergraduates at the University of West Indies. And Susanna was from St. Lucia, which is an island near Barbados. And I think was starting graduate school somewhere in archaeology, anthropology, and had gotten hooked up into it. But we're probably all laughing at Keith, but also it's probably the end of the day and the tropical sun makes you a little loopy after a while. So we were in a good mood at that point. The nose and the hat on the end. I've said that many times before. Just to familiarize yourself again, Barbados is the most eastern island in the, I guess that's the Lesser Antilles, I'm not sure. But farthest east of the arc of islands going from Puerto Rico down to South America. It's very densely populated, as you can see, 282,000 people in 166 square miles. You compare that to Pueblo County. And most of the people live on the western coast and southern coast. A lot of the interior is still agricultural. Temperature is fairly constant since it's a small island in the middle of the ocean and you get constant ocean breezes in the 80s, fair amount of humidity, cool 70s at night, but very intense sun since you're much farther south near the equator. And not much rain. We were there in, I think, late May through July, early July, something like that. And the entire island is made up of coral reef limestone that's been gradually uplifted over millions of years. It's still going up at 30 centimeters every 1,000 years. And there are various terraces. The northeast part, called the Scotland district, is, I'm not sure why, but it's very much more dissected than the rest of the island. Looks like that. Whereas others are just rolling terrain or completely flat. Great, this kind of area, great for plantations, for sugarcane plantations, which is where all the money came from in Barbados. It was once the richest colony of the British Empire. We did field work at 5 plantations: Nicholas Abbey, Bissex Park, Malvern, Guinea, and Hanson. And you can see where the Newton Cemetery is down there at the bottom. So we've got through a whole different whole array of landscapes out there. We did 185 acres of walking over cultivated fields, picking up artifacts, 35 acres where we put in a shovel test every 10 or 15 meters to see if we found anything in grassy fields, and 70 test units to see if there was anything down below in where we were digging. here's some of the places we worked. This is St. Nicholas Abbey as it is in modern times, built in 1658. In the bottom picture on the left is the house, on the right is the processing area for the sugar cane. That old, that stubby thing there in the far right is the base of a windmill that would have been used to crush the sugar cane and press out the cane juice. And then in the other building with the smokestack is some sort of processing area where they process it into molasses and rum and the sugar and other things. Bissex Park was a nice little plantation out in the flatter part of the country. So we did a lot of this kind of shovel testing in scrub land because we were concentrating on looking in places where you wouldn't use it for crops, because the idea was they're not going to use good agricultural land to bury slaves in. It's worth more than that to them. Test excavations, mostly in more swale areas where we thought there might be soil for graves and stuff. At one point, I wanted to call the report on this transiting in the trade winds, because you can see Beth on the far right there at the transit, and this is an old optical transit with a plumb bob on a string to try to line up to a previous nail. And we had to put plastic around the legs, all kinds of stuff to keep the wind from blowing it on some days. It was a real pain. Some places you get bedrock right close to the surface. That was great on shovel testing because you never knew when you pushed your foot in if you were going to go, or when you'd go down in dirt. In other places, it was deeper, like that swale I showed you before. This might even be from that site. I can't. Yeah, this is from Hanson, even though the slide is backwards there. So there are places with good soil depth, which was something I think might be important, but we still never found anything else. Maybe it was just bad luck. We didn't really use the right methods to find something. Many of them might be gone because they eroded out, and especially since bone preservation, even though you've got all this coral and limestone, it's very calcareous, very basic soil chemistry. But with all the moisture and heat and humidity, at Newton, they barely got tooth crowns. Bone was almost completely gone. So you never know. They may be out there and just they're not seen. Some of them might be buried in these areas with soil deposition, just as they started clearing lots of land, you would get a lot of soil movement in the rain and it washing down into lower areas. You see the same thing in the States in the 1800s in places in the Midwest where I've worked. After they clear the trees off and start clearing fields, I've seen places where you have a historic horse from the 1800s buried 8 feet deep along a creek bed. So it could be similar kinds of things here. I'm still amazed that no one's ever found another one, as far as I know. I'm looking on the web, putting this together. I see no mentions of any others being found. But at least we did get some information that was helpful to know where slaves were living on the site, where the quarters were, different plantations, because we would try to find that out first before we started looking for possible cemeteries, because we figured it'd be close to that. Later on in the early 2000s, a guy from University of Florida did some work at St. Nicholas Abbey plantation. In some of the same places that we surveyed, he was able to document even more about doing excavations about the slave quarters and how they were living. But we were getting soil in some of these deeper things. We were getting artifacts from the 1700s down 3-4 feet. So there's a lot of soil movement going on at the time. So it ended up being not as successful as we hoped, but we still had a pretty good time. Archie motto is work hard, play hard. And we did a lot of hard work out there in the tropical sun. But then we're able to take it easy and see some things around the island. One of the best thing Jerry did besides leaving was find the house where we stayed, just north of Bridgetown on the western coast. And this is a air photo from the 2000s, I think. But it's that large structure there, which there are 5 of us living there. Andy and Simon obviously stayed at home. They both lived on Barbados. And so there was enough room for all 5 of us. We had a big grass backyard that was a grass tennis court. It still had the net post, but it wasn't set up for tennis. But I guess the house had been a vacation rental because there were books in the living room, and there were croquet set and volleyball set and a Weber grill. So it was a nice little vacation spot. And there was even an outdoor shower on the corner. And as you can see, it's only 2 blocks to the beach. So after work, we'd quit about 2:30, 3 o'clock if you weren't on dinner duty or something, because we did all of our own cooking except maybe once a week. We'd have a rum and tonic or a local beer and head down to the beach, which was this. That was what we got to go to every day. There's a lot of nice beaches on Barbados. Oh, I don't know what they've done to the yard, but today, this is the latest air photo. It's just seems like a big mess of dirt. So I wouldn't want to be there now. But there's a lot of nice beaches on the western and southern coast, and they're all public. Everything below, I think it's like the high water mark of the highest tide is public. So you can't be prevented from going to a beach. What? Yeah, actually, I got a picture of a sandals here. But even those places, we would go in on our day off, sometimes to one of the resort hotels, and we just go out to the beach, and we could go to their bars, whatever. They didn't mind. We did go. This is a web picture, but I think we might have gone to it. We went to one fancy one down on the southern end of the island one time, where there were better waves. The west coast, the east coast, the Atlantic coast. A lot of it's like this, more rugged. There are some beaches, but you've got more into the wind there, and you've got these rollers coming in that started in Africa and crossed the entire Atlantic before they lap up against Barbados. So it's a little wilder over there. Bridgetown, the capital city. This is the harbor with sailing boats and fishing boats. This is another street scene. And we did other things looking around. There's several botanical gardens and natural areas. This is Welchman Hall Gully. It's a collapsed cave in the coral limestone, and then was filled in with dirt. And they've got was part of a plantation, and it's now a botanical garden. The plantation is reported to be, although I didn't follow it up a lot, but it's supposed to be the place where grapefruit was invented by a cross of oranges with something else. I'm not sure what the other fruit was. And they have a nice cave that you can go to and ride the tram through. If any of you have been to the Ozarks, to Fantastic Caverns, that is one of, I think there's only 3 caves in the world set up like this. That one in Missouri, and this one in Barbados, and one somewhere in Europe. But a couple of us did this one day. It was kind of neat. And then we'd go down to the fish market once or twice a week to buy fish for dinner. It was always a treat to see what was going on there and see the people and the fish. A lot of it was, these are bigger ones. I'm not sure what they all are, but one of the main things you saw were flying fish, even though even the adults are not big, but you can get a meal or 2 out of them. And it's the national symbol of Barbados, the flying fish. I used to have a really neat little rubber flying fish, but that I bought it as we were leaving. But yeah, but we still on camping trips use my Barbados playing cards for that. And the thing that started it all, which is Mount Gay rum. as you can see, established in 1703. So it's one of the oldest rums in the world. There's a bottle of it. Also another one called Cockspur, which is started in 1884. So it was a newbie, but they're both pretty good rums. And you can find them in the States. It seems like harder than it used to be when in the 90s, it seemed like I would see both Cockspur and Mount Gay in most places. You can get Mount Gay in Pueblo. It took me a little while this time because I went to a place I thought I had bought it before and they didn't have it, but I finally found it at Spanky's up by Lowe's North, had it. And it's, I'm not a big straight rum drinker or scotch or anything, but rum and tonic with a lot of tonic and lime takes care of malaria, takes care of scurvy. Very nice. So, and if any of you would like a sample, I brought a bottle and some little cups, and the perfect thing to drink before you go out on the icy highways. But if you want to sample it, be my guest. Any questions about anything? Yes, yeah. There's other things. One of the things we bought a lot for food were chickens and spinach, which are grown locally, but because a lot of the things that are imported we couldn't afford even back then. But so there's vegetable garden, truck garden kind of stuff, as well as a lot of sugarcane still, because not only these two distilleries, but like Nicholas Abbey is now distilling their own rum. So everybody that distills rum needs to have sugarcane. Yeah. What? From the early 1600s until 1960 something, they got their independence, I think. Right, in 1820 something. Yeah. Anything else? Well, it seems like, because there are just a couple. Can you guys keep it down over here? There's just a couple of documents. There's some. Yes, I am. I'm trying to answer her question. There are some like journals and things that people wrote that very few of them actually talk about what the slaves were doing. But there are some things that say that they should have been buried in the plantations. That's why it's such a weird mystery of where they are. Yeah. I don't think there were coffins. There were actual graves with grave goods. There were some grave goods found and stuff. And there might have been a few that were in coffins, I think. I didn't go back and read the report. What? Yes. There was one, I had it in here, but I took it out, but there was one burial they found at Newton of probably a shaman, and he had a necklace with 15 or 20 drilled dog canines and cowrie shells from the Indian Ocean that were obviously brought over from Africa with people that were brought there to Barbados as well, and some other stone beads and things, and pipes, smoking, the little kaolin smoking pipes that you see all over the colonial world were in there, and some other kinds of artifacts. Yeah. What? Yeah, you could see by its position as they come from Africa, it's one of their first landfalls, if not the first one. So a lot of the slaves would be maybe unloaded there or kept for a while there before they were moved off to Jamaica and United States, other places, or colonial America. Okay, have at it.
Okay, for those of you at home, we're wrapped up here. We're doing a couple of more drawings, then we're gonna chit chat for a while. So. They're drawings of George, but yeah, they're not raffles. So anyway, I guess I just won something. So thank you all from home, and we'll sign off on the Zoom. Good night.